This is a follow-up from the last video, going to go into a little bit more depth with some of the slightly harder stretches. Last time I gave maybe my simple general population introductory stretch series. This one's just a little bit more advanced. Maybe people who are a bit stronger and a bit tighter through the hips might need a bit more work, or people who are a bit more flexible and just want to take it a little bit further. The upper body stuff's going to be more or less the same, spine stuff's more or less the same, but it might help to reiterate. So anyway, this is our new video. We're starting, same as last time, with a cossack squat. We'll skip the versions where you get to lean on something and we'll head right down low. And once we're down here, you can actually play around with the positions a little bit. You might deliberately allow your knee to collapse in a little bit and then push it out a bit further, maybe using your elbow to help to try and open up through there. You might shift your weight around slightly, sink your hips down a little bit lower, let them pop up slightly. Feel your way into the position, give it a bit of a wiggle. Take your hands away so that you start to develop a bit more strength in these positions and get comfy, going down nice and low. For someone who's less familiar with these, like I said last time, you might pop up. You don't have to shift with your hips as low as this from side to side. You can pop back up in between, but it's worth building towards. Often people get really tight through perineals on the side of your calf here, trying to keep the whole foot on the ground rather than have it lift up like that. I like that stretch. It becomes an aspect of the stretch as we get down deeper. It's not just about the adductors, it's also about the top of the shin there, or the side of the shin there. Settle into that. I'm feeling really tight for here today, so I might even do some little bounces and let that open up a little bit. Once we've done that, the toes up version, same kind of deal. Sinking down nice and low, maybe working away from using the hands, playing with shifting your weight a little bit in different directions, feeling where it's tight. There's versions of this stuff where you'll actually sit down on the ground. I'm not flexible enough to do that. You guys can look that up. Some good sources on that. Maybe Kit Lachlan, he's a very knowledgeable guy, pretty deep into that. I played around with the gymnastics body stretch series as well. They do a lot of that kind of stuff. Switching sides. Bum down towards the heel. You might get a crack now and then. Don't be too worried about this. It's indicating, what is it indicating? Potentially just that you haven't moved through that range in a while. Sometimes if you get a crack every single time you're doing a movement, it's probably an indication that something's a little bit out of position. But say I haven't straightened my elbow all day, I straighten my elbow and it cracks like that, I'm not too worried. If it cracks every single time I straighten my arm, it might be showing me something. But don't just assume because your body's making noise that there's something wrong with you and you're damaged. Okay, next up, we have kneeling hip flexor. Last time we went over this, it's pretty straightforward. We're going to still do the same simple kneeling hip flexor stretch initially, just to get into position. I'm going to show you guys a much more advanced one later today, which I originally pinched from Kelly Starrett. He calls it the calf stretch. There's a few different versions of it. Basically, it's a quad stretch against the wall. I still like to do this one first, just to prepare your body for what's to come, right? If we dive right into the really deep, intense stretches, we don't give you a chance to open up and get loose first. It can be a bit much, and you won't get as much out of them. So even as you do get a bit more advanced, it's worth still paying attention to the simple ones. The basics never get old. So we still do our hip flexor stretch. I might add in just some gentle pulsing. I'm not ramming myself into the end range trying to tear something off, but I might just gently move in and out of that a little bit, get a tiny bit more range, squeeze my glutes slightly, and just work on opening up a little bit more through there. Just a gentle pulse. Next thing, same hamstring stretch we played with last time. If you're a little bit more advanced, we won't be using the arms, and we'll try to keep the knee locked. This might feel uncomfortable through the back of your knee. If so, please stop. You might not be strong enough through the back here yet. I don't want anyone hyperextending anything. But if you're comfy and your knee's conditioned, a straight leg, toes up towards the ceiling, and control, get as much length as you can, leaning forward with the chest. And we can also actually let the back go. And then try to flatten it out again. Oh, that's hard work. Once our body's towards our leg. We get into whatever position we get into today. That's not particularly impressive for me, but get as low as you're getting for now, and then you can actively press yourself back up. Maybe repeat that a few times. Building some strength through that range. Do the same thing on the other side. Again, back foot can be down or up, doesn't matter too much. Nice and tall, leaning forward. Make sure your hips are square and your foot hasn't shot out to the side. Leaning forward, controlling down. Woo, it's very tight for me. Cross your arms or reach over your head if you want to make the leap really hard. Woo. Point the toes and relax down. Try to lift back up again a little bit. Control through these ranges. Lots of different variations. Hamstrings often get a lot of attention in stretching. Everyone stretches their hamstrings. Not everyone worries about getting them strong. Another thing to consider is if you have tight hamstrings, it's often not that your hamstrings need a lot of stretching per se. Sometimes the problem is that you're not using your glutes very well, and so your hamstrings are doing all the work that your glutes should be doing. Often you actually need to stretch your glutes and your hip flexors more so that you can use this stuff and you don't end up overusing this stuff. So sometimes the cause of the tightness isn't necessarily at the spot where it manifests, and that's why you'll see us do a lot of glute stretches, and as we do later videos, you'll see a lot of glute strengthening work as well. We'll move on to our deeper hip flexor stretch called the cat stretch, which is also a quad stretch, and that'll be against the wall. Okie dokie. So yeah, this is the couch stretch. Like I said, I pinched this one from Kelly Starrett. He didn't invent quad stretching by any means. There's been stretches like this around for a while, but he was my original source for this one. We'll start with the knee against the wall, and then going to place the hands down on the ground and slide the toes up the wall. I'm just going to duck down so you can see. Right, that's where my leg is. From here, I'm going to focus on pushing my hip down towards the ground, not letting my knee come out to the side, pushing my hip down towards the ground. And my next step is to try and get this foot, my right foot, and place it on the ground. For a lot of people, this will be a pretty severe stretch. I've got a few banker mates who spend a lot of time sitting in front of a computer. I show them this one and they have a look like on their face. They start to hyperventilate, they think they're going to tear everything out because they're really tight through the front of their hips. They spend a lot of time sitting. This is a good antidote for those guys. If they can stomach it, it will be quite uncomfortable at first. While we're here, take some deep, slow breaths, preferably through the nose, because it's a bit hard to hyperventilate through your nose, and that's people's instinct. It's like, tight, tight. We're gonna relax, settle into it a little bit. As you exhale, you can sink the hip down and kind of squeeze the glute. I've had some ladies in particular who don't even feel this, don't even notice this. They're like, what are you talking about? Where's the stretch? Other, usually guys, will be absolutely crying in this position. So give it a little while, get used to it, sink the hips down. Once you can get that hip extended, once you can get comfy there, I like to use a box to help a little bit. It is kind of cheating. If you're really good at this, you can kind of press with that front heel and go back that way. But I like to use a box. We're doing this as part of a cool down. You've probably already done some heavy lifting. I'm gonna make it a little bit easier on you, and we'll just gradually help ourselves up. I'm pushing my bum back towards my heel, making sure I don't lose my belly tightness and end up just arching really hard through my back. It's so tight. I'm trying to keep that a little bit on and make the stretch come from down here in my hip flexor and down lower again in my quadricep. Shift that foot back a little bit. And about there, it's pretty comfy for me today. So my bum's touching my heel. I'm up nice and tall. That's a pretty good deep quad stretch. I'm gonna breathe and relax here. Ultimately, it would be great if I could get my shoulder blades back towards the wall and really open up as much as possible. This is going to go a long way towards stopping you from tightening up, making you able to move around the day after a bunch of heavy squats, or even just the day after a long time sitting at a desk. So I'll show you the same on the other side, and we'll look at that from a side angle. Alrighty, other side in another room. Lights are coming on, fantastic. Okay, so we're having the other knee against the wall, sliding the toes up. I like to keep the ankle plantar flex there, so the toes are pointing like that. This will help stretch out a little bit through our tibialis anterior on the front of our shin, and also a little bit through the front of the foot. Not uncommon to feel some cramps through the sole of your foot here. Don't worry about it, just breathe, relax, it'll pass. Sometimes your toes will cramp pretty hard, that's a bit uncomfortable too. It's all right, take a breath, enjoy it, it's part of the process. Anyway, we're here, and as with the other side, I take my opposite foot and I'll lift it, place it next to my hand. From here, I'm going to try and extend that hip. So in this case, to my right hip, I'm extending that down towards the ground. So I'm opening up through here, and I'll squeeze my bum a little bit at the back. We don't want to drift away, so I basically keep my bum in line with my heel as I press down. Some people will find that their opposite leg is actually limiting them here. If their glutes are really tight, they won't be able to get into this position because their glute won't let them, they'll be stuck back here. They need to work on their squat. See our cossack squat, that'll be a helpful one for opening up through the other hip. But anyway, pushing the hip down here, making sure we're not arching through the back, but we're extending through the hip. As I said last time, for some people, this stretch will be quite severe. This will be enough to get them started. Once you've opened up through here for a little while, it's relaxed, we start to use our handy box to help, gradually popping up against the wall. I'm going to get my bum back towards my heel without arching my back a whole bunch, keeping this organized in the front. I'll use my box to help. And I'll shift my shoulder blades. I might even shift my foot back a little bit, back towards the wall, and then I'll hold it there until I get a nice deep release through there. I'll quickly show you guys some ways to step this up another notch if you're ready to. I probably don't need it because I'm a little tight, but there are ways to make this a little bit harder. One of them is to elevate your back knee a little bit. If you put a pad or something like that so that that knee ends up a little bit higher, this will be a more intense stretch through the back. Another way to do this is to curl the toes under. And the first time someone showed me this one, I swear I cried. We pop up, and you think about pushing hard into the wall, hard into the wall with that back foot, and then you relax and go back a bit further. Push hard into the wall, and then relax and go back a bit further. That one can be quite intense. That's the more advanced version of the couch stretch. We'll move on to some harder glute stuff. All right, we've moved away from the wall. Everyone can recover from the trauma of the couch stretch. And now we're going to stretch out the glutes. Basically, we have front knee at right angles, rear knee at right angles. And we're just going to try and sit up tall. This is a bit of internal rotation through the back hip, a bit of external rotation through the front hip. Don't worry if this back hip's way off the ground at the start and you have to lean on your hand. Over time, we'll work our way down so that we can do that a bit more comfortably. Once you can get into that position, we think up through the crown of the head, and then you're going to lean your chest towards your knee. Just gradually sink into that position. And just breathe here. This is like the introductory version, just starting to get down there. Some guys will feel this as an intense glute stretch already. Some people will be flopping here being like, what's he even talking about? This isn't a stretch yet. But most people, when we add in the next bit, will find it quite challenging. We take the chest and we move it towards the foot, like that. Sometimes we'll straighten out the back leg. This will turn it into something a lot like pigeon pose from yoga. And we can take some deep breaths and let that front glute, my left glute, stretch out. As my chest sinks down towards my foot. This one can be quite hard through the outside of the knee for some people. If you're not ready for it yet, you can try our easier glute stretch from the last video. There's also another variation, which I will show you very quickly now. This version involves a bench at a bit of an angle, which can just be a little bit gentler through the knee than doing it on flat ground.
Can you go back just that bit?
Yep. So this version involves a bench at an angle, which can be a little bit gentler on the knee than doing it on flat ground, but you can still replicate the same stretch. I can sink down, get my chest towards my foot, get a glute stretch without necessarily having as much stress through the outside of the knee. And then as you get better at it, you can adjust your bench. Where are we? Flatten it out. And then we're doing something much closer to what we were doing on the ground. Hanging out down here, opening up through the glute. Yeah. Okay, next step. We're back down on the ground. Pretend we did that on both sides. So starting with our figure 4, we had chest to the knee, chest to the foot. We might have straightened out the back leg, done a pigeon variation. Next stretch we're going to do is a partial version of something called a Turkish twist. We're not going to add in the spine part for our purposes, although you can if you like. I might show you, but generally we'll just do this for the glutes. This is a really good one for people who do a lot of sitting and or a lot of squatting. I'm going to take that front leg and bring it across the front, like so. And then I'm going to sit back, avoiding my rear foot. Make sure you don't sit on the wrong side of your foot. Whoop, that'll be the wrong stretch. Inside. I try to get both butt cheeks on the ground. I give that a little bit of a hug. And lengthen out through the spine. Some nice deep breaths. And try to get comfy, try to be calm in this position. As with the couch stretch against the wall, people often find themselves taking short breaths, wincing, tightening up, trying to avoid where things are locked up. I want you to actually go there, but go there gently, go there gradually. Let yourself sink into the stretch a little bit. Let yourself get comfy in that position. And we'll lengthen out through the spine. And you can just chill here. The more advanced version, which adds in a bit of rotation through the spine as well as what's already happening through the hip, and for a full Turkish twist, involves a lot of length coming around, so I'm rotating, and then you might give a tiny bit of assistance with the arms, and look over your back shoulder. But for our purposes, we're focusing more on the hips. You don't need to worry about the spine part. I'll show you again on the other side. Woo, very tight today. I'm going to be kneeling. I take my front leg across. Some people can get into this more easily, but I like this version because even the really stiff guys tend to be able to get into position if they start this way. The legs brought across, we sit down onto the ground, and then we can chill out here. If you need to have your hands on the ground and lean back a bit, that's okay, but we're aiming to ultimately get up nice and tall. Deep breaths, relaxation. I often feel this one just as much through the bottom hip as through the top hip. I don't mind too much. With a lot of these positions, particularly if we do something based in yoga, we're not so much worried about, we've got to feel it in just this spot. If you get into the right position, and this is the same for the lifts, the right muscles will be working if you're in the right position. You might feel deadlifts in your glutes. Maybe your glutes are the weak link. You might feel deadlifts in your forearms. Maybe your grip's the weak link. The movement is still the same, the goal is still the same. It doesn't necessarily have just one target muscle. So that's something to keep in mind as we go through a bunch of other exercises. Another variation for this one, we can straighten the bottom leg. This is one for really tight guys who just don't have that much range through the hips, and they can hug their knee into their chest like this. This variation, maybe with a twist, could be a little bit more accessible if you don't actually have the range through the hips or the flexibility through the quads to allow you to get to here without hurting your knees. So after we finish this one, we flop onto our bellies and we continue with the pec stretch. Same as last time, we're reaching over to one side, stretching out, and basically the rest of the stretching sequence is the same as it was in my beginner video. This one was essentially just a few slightly more advanced, more in-depth versions. For those of you who have a bit more time or need to spend a bit more time getting a bit deeper into the hips and working those a little bit harder. Thank you for watching. Next time we're going to start up with some actual movement videos, so working into some of the technique elements for our basic movements, squatting, pressing, pulling, hinging, carrying things around. Thank you, Dan John. I stole those categories from Dan John. You guys can learn about those in our upcoming videos. Thank you very much.